clear UX. I never get clear feedback if we're live, but I think we're live. Hey, everybody, it's Debbie Levitt from Delta CX. It is January 30th, 2020. You're joining us for our live podcast, and today's guest is the always fantastic Lee. Now, I always pronounce your name Italianly, and I go Andrese, but how would you say it?
Andrese.
Okay, well then, good. We're already agreeing. This is so fantastic. So Lee Andrese and I have been orbiting each other for so long. When I knew her from her Aquint days, but while I get 2 million windows open so that we can catch our live questions today, Lee, please introduce yourself.
Well, hello, everybody, and thank you, Debbie, for having me on your podcast. You're doing some great things out there for user experience, and we all appreciate it. So I have been swimming in the UX pond since 2010, when I left the head of our learning services department at Aquint to move back into a field role as Aquint moved towards segment specialization, and user experience was one of those segments. And I supported Jason Brownywell, who is, I don't know how well known he is, but he certainly is well known in my world. He had up a significant UX practice before he came to Aquint and left and went to Granger and had up an even larger UX practice. So by way of Jason, who forced me to, really dig deep in UX, I got my certification as a usability analyst from HFI, which allowed me to just have more meaningful conversations with the people and the customers I represented. So that's the 30,000 foot view on how I got involved with UX.
And tell everybody what you're doing now and how to spell it.
So after 21 years at Aquint, and the last, 10 years, 10, 11 years of focusing on nothing but supporting user experience practice and the capability and all that good stuff, I realized that one of the things that was really missing in this domain was the ability to tell a story. User experience practitioners, just like every expert, right? If you're a CPA or an attorney, you're really good at your craft, but you're not necessarily great at telling your story. And you're not great at representing yourselves either. So it's really hard to do because you're too close to your own subject, which is you. And so I started this company called Akathame, which is derived from two words: Akasha, energy from above, and Athame, which is a tool that's used to direct energy. So my goal is now to help people direct their energy. And specifically,
you are the Reiki of storytelling.
I am. I really am. And I've gotten it to the point where it's an obsession with what you guys do. But here's the reason. I mean, Debbie, honestly and truly, who else in business is looking out for the end user, which are people like me, other than user experience people? All around you, every department around you is looking at the financial aspect, is looking at the marketing, everything else but the user.
It's often too true.
To me. Yeah. I mean, everybody wants to market to me. I always put myself in the user's shoes. And typically in the digital domain, I'm known as the lowest common denominator. Like if it's Lee easy, people will use it. So, and it's true. If it's easy enough for me to get, if I can open the box and start, you got a winner.
And you're not going to read the manual.
No, I'm not. I will be the first one to tell you that manuals do not exist for me, which kills my friends who are master technicians.
Technical writers, yeah.
And technical writers. And I mean, the mechanics, just my friends who work on cars, they're like, read the manual. What manual? Well, there's a manual. No, there's no manual. There's no manual. If I can't figure it out, it's just,
And you're most people. So shifting into storytelling, just so that everybody who's listening is on the same page, tell us your definition of storytelling.
So storytelling is the ability to articulate who you are, what you do, how you do it, and what you want at the end of that story, specifically for business. But storytelling as a whole is the ability to get people to to buy into something that you believe in, whether it is a personal belief, whether it is something you are trying to get them to do, or how you want somebody to think or feel, or get them to buy. So storytelling is the ability to bring people into your space, into your mind, and gain some kind of an agreement, even if it's to laugh. Stories telling, the best stories, make you laugh. Those are called jokes, which is why, yes, and that. So when you do, because I've done stand up, I'm actually working on some improv stuff. So it's all storytelling. It's all storytelling. And also clearly that, I don't have a life, so that's why I spend a lot of time on stories.
No, you and I are Instagram buddies. I know everything about your life. You have an amazing life. It is I who has no life.
I've got great stories, right? They're all good stories.
That's true.
Yeah,
that's true. I know everything about your dog's beds.
Yes.
So bringing this back, first of all, we are live on LinkedIn and YouTube. If anybody has a question or comment as we're going, please leave your comment and I'll make sure to read it out when Lee or I take a breath. Good luck. So looking back at the CX and UX world, when we think about storytelling, the first thing I tend to think of is the resumes and portfolios of people new to the industry, people who are already in the industry. Our resumes and portfolios sometimes don't sell us very well.
Yeah, so I think that you're going to get 1,372 different opinions about what a good resume and a portfolio is going to be. And so I try to keep that I try, when the people that I represent or the people that I coach, because we also provide a lot of career coaching, the people that we work with, we make it very, very clear that in your resume or within your portfolio, there's three things that you must include, right? What you can do, right? What you have done, which is based on metrics and based on impact.
Outcomes.
And outcomes, right? Impact outcomes. And then you have to somehow make an impression. And this is where that storytelling part becomes very important, especially for visual designers, VisDs, UIs, things of that nature. When you're talking about strategic positions like user research and usability testing, then you really want to talk about very much so you want to focus your stories on the process, right? So when you're looking at the resume, it's what did I do and what was the outcome? You're going to save the details of that action piece when you get in front of the hiring manager or the client. So in your resume, you need to say what you've done, what was the outcome. And that's really what those are the only two parts of your story that should be included in there. And when I say that, and I mean your role. So if you've got a visual, right? If you're looking at a portfolio sample, what was the reason that you needed to create that piece? What was the business reason behind that? What was the problem that you were trying to solve? What was your role? And then what was the outcome? When you go to that meeting, that's when you say, here's what actually happened.
I remember a UX guy once sent me his resume and asked me to take a look at it just to see what I thought and give some feedback, because I do that for free from time to time. And this person had listed the company and the job title and the dates, and that was it. And they hadn't put anything else. And I said, well, this resume isn't really compelling to me because I really don't know what you did there. I don't know. It says UX, but I don't know research, testing, architecture, something else. And he was like, oh, well, couldn't you guess? I mean, he literally wrote me back and said something like, oh, I just assumed you would know that I did this. And I was like, are you effing kidding me? Like, I'm not in your head. I'm not psychic. So Reminder from everybody, I always remind people, UX your own resume. If you are so good at putting yourself in the customer's shoes and thinking about what they need, put yourself in the shoes of someone who's going to look at your resume and think about what's going to be compelling to them.
Take it one step further, because you just brought up a really good point that the UX decision maker may not have the first shot at your resume. If it doesn't make it through the ATS, the applicant tracking system, if you are getting it in front of a recruiter who may not be an expert on user experience, or they could be strong in digital but not UX, right? Then they're going to let your resume go. So your end user, and that's a really good point, Debbie, and I never really thought of it that way, but the product that you're putting out in this resume, you've got to think about who those end users are. It could be a recruiter, it could be a hiring manager, it could be a senior leader. So what part of that message do you want to craft in that deliverable? And because that really is, when you look at UX artifacts, when I look at a UX portfolio and I look at their artifacts, I think that it's a really great idea that user experience people look at that resume as an artifact, right? If they were to,
That's what I'm saying.
if they were to look at that resume as an artifact and actually wire it as such, if you're gonna wireframe something, let's use that. That's a great idea. That's brilliant.
Yeah,
Excellent.
and we've got a couple of questions and comments already in the chat. So people are already active. We've got a hello from a friend of the show. We've got hello from Cape Town, which I assume would be South Africa. And we've got a question, which is, I guess, thinking about the resume. When are details too much, and how can we know what's important for that HR or ATS filter? I guess, how do you balance those keywords?
Yeah. So if you are afraid that if your resume needs binding, if you need it to be hard bound, or then it's too long. So so that's clue number one. Clue number two is that at the end of your resume, if you have to go to page 3, you can actually put in a keyword section in that page. So if it's not spelled out in the first page or 2 of your CV, then create that 3rd page and just use it, nothing for keywords, right? Nothing but for keywords. Okay, I'm gonna ask you guys to stop putting yourself in the shoes of an employee. That's number one. I want you to start thinking of yourselves as service providers. And you are a recipient of services. I am sure at one point or another, you have all screened potential people as candidates or for services. Take a look at the resume and think to yourself, does this articulate in 1 or 2 sentences, plus your most significant accomplishment, does this articulate what I have done? That's all you've got to ask yourself. Does this say what I've done? And you should be able to do that in a couple of sentences. At the bottom of that, in that section, put 1 bullet in there and just put your key accomplishment underneath that job description, somewhere in there. I don't care how you format. Some people put the key accomplishments at the very top underneath what they're trying to achieve, and then they list their work experience. So I don't care, but the accomplishments and what you've done should be compact. And that's why people are charging, upwards of $1,000 to $2,000 to do a resume, because it is a skill.
Yeah,
it is a skill. To write a resume is a skill, just like any writer, right? So, so there's that. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, we will ask the people in the room. If you guys have any follow-up questions or comments, let them fly. There's usually a 30 to 60-second delay between when we say something and when you see it, and then when you respond to it. So I know we're a little bit asynchronous, but keep the questions and comments coming. We also have a hello from Sophie from Barcelona, who is originally from France, but was living in the UK, and I met her in India. So wow. Sophie's one of the most international people I know. She's nice. Also available for contracts that she's got in her name. Here's an interesting How about this for a story, Lee? Sophie has her name as Sophie available for contracts. And then last name.
I love it. Sophie, connect with me on LinkedIn.
Sophie, look for Lee.
Yes, Sophie, look for Lee. Everybody can connect with me on LinkedIn. That's fine. So I do want to take a step back before we even get to the resume. I think that one of the challenges that user experience talent have is that when they get to the interview, this is where they fall. This is where they fall short. So once you get in the door, that's one hurdle. So you need to make sure your story has enough exposure within that one artifact of your past performance. But when you are sitting in front of either a panel of people or you've got to know your audience. So before you go into that interview, please ask the recruiter or ask whomever is scheduling all of this, who are you meeting with? Because your story is going to be parsed based on who you are talking to. So if you are talking to a senior leader of the organization, just for example, I'm going to throw a wrench in. What happens if it's a small company and you've got a CFO sitting in the room? what is a chief financial officer going to be doing in that meeting? They don't understand user experience. They can barely spell UX. So what we want to do is, that's not all CFOs. there's a lot of extremely knowledgeable CFOs in the digital domain, but not all. So right. You've got to be able to take your story. And by the way, there's 3 parts to your story that you've got to be able to articulate. What was the business problem that you solved? How did you solve it? And I don't just mean high level, how did you solve it? You've got to be able to detail all of the interactions, all of the tasks, all of the tools, all of the challenges, all the people that you interacted with inside the company, outside the company, how high in the organization, how high externally to the organization. If you had to work through contracts and finance, you've got to put all of that into your mind, because that CFO is going to ask you that one question about your story, and you've got to be ready. And a CFO question is typically, so I got this question actually. If you were to start a usability capability within our company, how much funding would you need? I got that. I'm not even a user experience person, right? But this was a question. I can represent the hell out of you people. and I can talk the talk. But my portfolio is not that. It's of representing. My story is about representing you guys. So here's what I told that CFO. I said, you know what? I said exactly what I told you. The truth is, I don't have a clue as to how much so-and-so is going to need to start this capability. I do know that the average salary is about $125,000 at this level. So if he needs 3 to 5 people to kick this off, I would budget at least $500,000 for the first year, just in salaries. Now, what about tools? I don't know. So do you see what I'm saying? So even though—
Be ready for answers.
Yes. Even though it isn't my story, I was able to represent this senior level person to a CFO by saying, this is what your company is going to get though. For $500,000 investment, I can guarantee you that your customer satisfaction is going to go up. I can guarantee you that the people are going to buy more products from you, blah, 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 blah. Ask me what happened. The guy got in there and he got the job.
And we're getting comments furiously. Now, first of all, Adrian is like telling us his entire life story here. So, Adrian, I cannot keep up with you. You are like live tweeting your hiring process here. And friend of the show, and I always am worried I'm pronouncing your name wrong. Please private message me and tell me how to pronounce you. Kleber. It looks like a Portuguese or Brazilian name. He's saying generally he has 2 versions of his resume. One might go to HR just to make it through some of that early screening, and then one that might be more customized for the company or targeted to the hiring manager.
Yeah, I think that's great. You know what, guys? I think the resume is important, but what's more, you will get just the word, the letters UX in your resume are going to get you seen. That's how hot UX still is, right? My concern is that when you get in front of the hiring managers, you're not making it through. And the feedback that I was constantly getting is that they couldn't tell the story behind the work that they've done.
Do you want to try asking me a typical question and let's see how I answer it, and then you can cut me to pieces?
I would love to. And
wow.
This is a question that everybody, all of your listeners should be able to answer, right?
Okay.
If the interviewer asks any other question than this, then you're not talking to the right level of person, right?
Okay.
Because this is what they're going to be most concerned about. And by the way, I want the candidates on the other side, I want you guys to ask the same question of the people that you are interviewing, because I get very passionate about this. If you are not working, Debbie, with somebody who is an advocate for user experience within your organization, doesn't have the ear of the senior leaders and the support of the senior leaders, your portfolio, your work is going to be minimalized, and you're going to be frustrated, and you're going to be
an order
taker. 3 months. Yep. Yes. And you're going to be calling me in 3 months saying, get me out of here.
Yeah. They're telling me to just put a blue button here.
Yes. Okay, so Debbie, tell me about your most significant accomplishment within the past 3 years, and I'm going to tell you why 3 years, and after we're done, in the past 3 years. Tell me about that.
Okay, in the past 3 years, I think the most significant accomplishment I had was a project I worked on last year where I came into a startup as kind of an interim director of UX and product manager because it's very small. So I did both. And this was a company that had always been working this way. What did the CEO want today? Engineers would just build it. Next day, what does the CEO want? Engineers built it. And it was a lot of redos and stumbling over what did the CEO want that day. And when I came in, I decided we can't work this way. It doesn't really make sense. And it's not incorporating any good user experience practices. And every day we were building something different. So had to put product management in place, had to put a UX practice in place, and had to start getting all the people in the engineering team and engineering leads in sync with the idea of how UX can be lean and UX can be part of an agile process.
So did you have to educate? You said the president or the CEO was coming down saying, do this, do this. Is that what I was hearing?
Yeah, that was the CEO, and luckily my boss is actually the chief technology officer, and he managed to get the CEO kind of out of the picture a little bit and let him be kind of more the faraway idea guy we spoke to weekly, and they gave me the power to kind of run what we were doing in what order and collaborate with the engineers on that.
So how large a company was this? What was their revenue on an annual basis?
Oh
Approximately.
man, yeah, it was a little hard to determine only because they were in the process of buying another company, which made them look like they had a lot more revenue because they suddenly had this other company's revenue. But I believe they were in maybe the 50 million a year range, and they were also on the OTC stock exchange, so they had people to answer to.
And so there was no department there before, UX capability there before you started, the CTO brought you in?
Right. So what happened was before me, they had outsourced to a couple of UX UI hybrid people in, I think, Colombia, just to have some people doing some of the visual design and things like that. And because they wanted to try to uplist from the OTC to the higher stock exchange, I think it was the New York, no, it was the Nasdaq. I think it was the Nasdaq. They brought in a whole bunch of heavy hitter, expensive consultants, me included. CTO came in, and a whole bunch of us came in. I was one of like 12 people who came in at the same time, kind of like a real power group. But I was the only person from UX. There was a guy who was strictly UI, and then there were a whole bunch of people who were from engineering.
So why did they bring you in the first place? Why did the CTO bring that capability to the organization in the first place?
Yeah, because he knew from some of his previous work at other companies that bringing in a real, I hate to say real UX because it implies what was happening before wasn't real, but a more professional and standardized approach to UX was going to make the company more efficient and stronger and have stronger products. And of course, I mean, ultimately, everybody just wanted the bottom line to look good. They wanted to look good to investors. They wanted to get their stock to go up. I think that was that drove everybody more than what does the customer want or need or like. But I had to represent what does the customer need, and then how can we make that so fantastic that it should increase consumer confidence and drive that stock up.
So I'm going to stop the role play right here because this is where a lot of people get stuck. So it is still very unclear to me as to how user experience was perceived within the organization beforehand. Is it just something sexy to have, right? And if they did not have any other reason than to bring you in other than to say we are doing user experience, for example, I would want to hear we brought Debbie in because our product wasn't being utilized beyond a week, or we were losing customers, or we were do you see what
Okay.
I'm saying?
Yeah, I have that answer. I have that answer, but I didn't think of that answer.
Right. So that is what I'm talking about. We need
Okay,
to
great.
understand what is the business problem why would a company bring in user experience? And I will tell you, if you are in a job interview, turn that question around. Why do you want me here? Why do you need me here? Why do you need a user experience designer or an information architect or a researcher or a tester? Why is this role in existence? And if you hear anything other than we've got a problem with our product, and here's the problem, then you have got a situation where they might want to bring you in because they need to have this in their portfolio, that they're trying to look good for somebody or something for all the wrong reasons. And then you're going to go there and you think you're going to be doing research and testing. And guess what? You're doing wireframes, and they're going to want you to develop, and they might even want you to do some visual design work. And all of a sudden you're like, Photoshop, that's really not my thing.
Yeah, and ultimately, the right answer to that question that I should have said was that this company had built their product 4 times and it was never finished and never released fully to the public. It was like constantly in alpha, and they would release different alphas, like version 1 looked nothing like version 2, looked nothing like version 3, but they were all still half-built, half-assed messes, honestly, and the investors were hot on their asses. The investment message boards were lighting up with fury that is this company just vaporware?
There you go. Now we're talking. Do you see what it took to get to that point, though,
That's
Debbie?
cooking with gas. Yeah, I didn't even think of giving you that answer.
Now I'm excited. Now I'm excited to represent. Now I'm excited.
Great.
Yes. Well, now we don't know if you're great yet, because then we're going to talk about step by step what you did to overcome and fulfill the needs, and then how well did you appease the investors. So I do want to stop here. So there are 3 big types of problems that user experience people solve. Number 1, let's think about the investors. It's the financial aspect, right? It's the increase in the revenue. It's improving processes and efficiencies, right? There's that. And then there's that whole user experience capability. So what did you do to improve the user experience processes and tools to make iterations, to get it through the agile? Did you go from waterfall to agile, and how did that impact the approvals? How quickly did you get things out the door? How fast were you at iterations, and what was that compared to before? And then the last one is, did you actually change the experience of the user? How much did you change their relationship with the product that the company has? So this is big stuff, which is why, we take our time when we're representing people to walk through this process. But you did good.
Yeah, thanks. And this story doesn't a lot of my stories don't have fantastic endings. And so if you ask me more questions about it, ultimately it ended up being a 6-month contract, and then they ended up shifting all the UX work to the company they had bought. So it was a hired, I was always meant to be a hired gun. And after about 6 months, they cut almost all of the hired guns. I think they kept 1 guy, and they hired a whole bunch of like Colombians, Costa Ricans. So I don't have a great end of this story, because I didn't, there was the reason why I brought it up and why I was proud was because within 3 weeks, I was able to get that company to start incorporating UX into everything it did, and to care about the design of things and these details. But ultimately, I didn't get to see it through. So there's things I'm proud of there, but it doesn't have the great outcomes that I can speak to.
I bet if you were to ask your audience right now, how many of you are in that same position?
And I was just going to say, almost every job I have has an uncool ending, where it started, where I can talk about great things that I did. Oh, at this job, I was the lead role, and I was able to mentor juniors and give presentations and drive this and drive that. And then crap fell apart, and wow, it ended badly. And even I talk sometimes fairly openly about my 2 years at Macy's.com, partially because I'm done with it, and partially because they're going to close the whole office. But and I met, 98% of the people there were wonderful, so they know I'm not talking about them. But Macy's was a difficult environment because I've nothing to show for it in my portfolio, yet I was there for 2 years. So if you ask me what I did in the last 3 years, I had a lot of false starts on weird projects at Macy's.
Okay. So because I hear this all the time, Debbie, you are not the only one. And this is a tough part of what you do, right? And this is a tough part of being a consultant too, because you don't always see the end of the story. So here's what I would suggest in those parts is that when you take this gig on, that, especially the one where you are a hired gun to get that UX capability within the organization, you actually fulfilled the requirement. You were responsible for initiating that UX capability. What they do with that capability once you have it in place is totally up to them. So you fulfilled your end of the bargain. So that's why you feel so good about it, because inside 3 weeks, you were able to get people on board. And it sounds like you implemented new processes, you had new tools.
Yes.
If you were talking to somebody who actually knew what you were talking about, you would go into great detail about that. I'm not saying that I don't. I probably
could.
I know more than most recruiters, but I will tell you, it's those details that you and I would finesse before you met with a hiring manager to make sure that you do have that story down. So instead of saying that I wasn't there and I have these crappy endings, you say this, I was charged with doing this one thing and I did it.
Right. And then I was the hired gun and I moved on.
That's exactly right. So whether you were there for 1 year or 2 years or 3 years or whatever, 6 months, you are, and that is why when you take a job, you need, and you're in that interview process or you're taking it as a contractor, I want you to look at that hiring manager or look at that prospective client and say, what is the business problem? What problem are you trying to solve? And ask them what is going to be a good outcome and a great
success
outcome.
Criteria.
Yes. Set that all up now, because that is how you start your career stories. The instant that somebody asks you for help, what is it that you want me to do? And what are you going to define as a success? And then here's the part that you guys always fall short on. I want you to start journaling. I want you to journal at the end of every day or at the end of a week. Do not wait more than a week though, because you will forget what the hell you did. I want you to start journaling. And I want you to think people, process, technology. What did I do with people? Who did I work with? Did I implement a new process? Did I change a process? Did I improve a process? Remember, process translates to efficiencies. Efficiencies translates to lower costs for a company, right?
Right.
So
still
now
outcomes.
You're affecting the bottom line, right? If it created a process that helps, I mean, one person I represented changed the entire membership process and they were getting new members like this. And so they went from, they increased revenue. I want to say it was like 300 or 400% inside a month. But that's because he looked at the process that a new member was completing to become a new member, and they cut it down from double digits to like 4 steps. It was ridiculous. But that's what good user experience people do. But you need those metrics when you take that engagement. And here's another thing. If you're a full-time employee, working inside an organization, inside a user experience function, every time you take a project, you have a conversation with that client, your internal client or your external client, your stakeholder, and you say, what is it what hurts?
Right.
What hurts?
Yep.
And always ask them, what are you willing to invest?
And how are we going to measure it to know that we were successful later so that UX can finally get some credit for what they do?
And then meet with those stakeholders once a week and give them a project update, give them some type of a status. You are like the physicians. User experience people are like when I go to Johns Hopkins physicians and I have a general physician and then I've got other physicians that I work with that are specialists. UX folks are specialists within the digital domain. And I come to you and I say, this is the problem that I'm having. And it's like a team of physicians that you go to. So if I gave something to you, Debbie, you go to your team of people and say, okay, I need you guys, these are the tests that I'm ordering. I need you to draw blood. And I
right.
I
will.
Yes. If you don't come from that mindset of being the expert in your domain, it becomes even harder for you to articulate, let alone craft your story.
And we've got a great question from Kleber, who is Brazilian. And he says, and I'm going to use a swear word here because he's written it, should we consider going through fuck-up stories and what we in the organization learned from it? So I guess the question that I hear is it okay to talk about a story where something went badly or had a bad ending and what we learned? Or do you avoid those stories because maybe you sound negative?
Head on. Let me tell you something. If you are going to show a fuck up story, my suggestion is combine that with how you learned from it. What did you do on the next engagement that you learned from that screw up, right? So that's how you lever that. If you don't make mistakes, if all of your projects are perfect, I doubt you.
Wow. Yeah.
I doubt you. I
Sure.
doubt you. So,
Yeah.
and that's another thing. As you're working on these projects and in your stories, you need to articulate what challenges you had to overcome. If it was with a person, a process, a technology, whatever it was, inside or external to that client or that company, you also need to articulate that, because overcoming problems, problem solving, is the most important capability of pretty much anybody, right? In the workplace. If you can't overcome problems, that's a challenge in and of itself. So
Yeah, so that makes me think that my answer really should have been before about being brought in to improve processes and efficiencies because the company had never shipped a proper product, and to remotivate the engineers who every day were being order takers from the CEOs and at CEO and didn't know what they were building from day to day because it was whatever the CEO's whim was that day. And I had to come in and establish a proper product roadmap and UX principles and integration into processes to get everybody into a more formalized program with a real trajectory.
And you had to include senior level people within your organization, right?
Yeah, I mean, I answered to the CTO, and I had a weekly meeting with the CEO and a number of other high level people who wanted to see what we were working on and how fast we might be able to get it out there.
So that tells me that you can hold your own in a very difficult and challenging environment, because CEOs are concerned about what? What are CEOs concerned? And this is the other thing. User experience designers in general, are not real strong in the business acumen area. So what are CEOs most concerned about? What if, regardless if they're publicly held or private companies, what are CEOs most concerned about? They're concerned about revenue. They're concerned about brand. They're concerned about the bottom line, the return on investment, and their EBITDA, which is, money that they've got, right? They need to be able to show a beautiful P&L. And if they can't achieve that, and user experience doesn't tie to that in some way, shape, or form, guess what's going to be the first area to get cut in a company?
Yeah, it's usually us.
Well, it's human resources. I mean, it could be marketing. I've seen plenty of marketing departments just all of a sudden go away.
It's all the job someone thinks is a pair of hands.
Yeah. So you've really got to be able to understand your impact to the organization, your impact to the business. Most importantly, you've got to show how user experience improves the lives of the people that are using your products, because that affects the top line, it affects revenue, and it affects brand. Brand has a value to it. And if your products are improving the brand, then you will improve revenue. Then the rest of it is up to the company to manage, the middle of the P&L, the processes, the tools, the technology. But that's another part of a UX leader's responsibility, to make sure that we're operating efficiently.
Just a couple of comments here. Friend of the show, Eugene in the UK, says extremely valuable and timely insights from Lee, and he's also loving the live tweeting from Adrian. Adrian's last comment, couple of comments here. Adrian is writing so much I can't even read it to you. I can't scroll back. He says he doesn't totally agree with the people process tech style CV for UX, and he says he just wants to, when he's interviewing, researching, I assume, he wants to hear UX. And let's see. He says, Debbie, that's the thing. You're there as an expert. Not everyone will welcome what you say, but you're the expert.
That's right. So again, there's 1,389 opinions about a resume. And you're going to have to look at your resume and say, does it articulate well enough what I do and the impact that I make? That really is the test of time, right? It is how strongly you feel about what's out there. The rest of it, you've got to get through an applicant tracking system and a recruiter that may or may not know or understand or have a love and a passion for UX like some of us do.
And I tend to think that when people write to me and say, "Oh, I've put in X amount of applications and I'm not even getting interviews," I tend to believe that chances are their resume is poor, perhaps the portfolio is poor, or both. That there's something that's causing them to be rejected before someone even wanted to talk to them.
Yeah. There's a whole host of reasons there, Debbie.
Okay. Well, I don't want to get too, we've got 20 minutes left to the hour, and I think you and I could probably burn 20 minutes. What else do you want to tell us about storytelling? Is there anything you wanted to cover? Do you want to stay on that topic, or do you want to cover more about storytelling within our job, like when we have to do presentations?
So I think that it's also important that if you are in the UX domain, whether you are new to the function or whether you are slightly used or you're really experienced, you've got to be able to slice and dice your story and understand who your audience is. That's where we get lost. The other place that we get lost is that a lot of candidates don't realize how important the reference is. So the people that you provide as references should be able to articulate your story as well as you do, right? So if they are former hiring managers or they're former clients, they have to be able to provide a mental image of how you interacted within that organization, right? To do whatever it is that you did. So that's part number one. So I would definitely work with your references and say, this is the part that I really want you to focus on. Don't just throw out everybody's name in there and that you knew that you worked with, but make sure that you coach them and work with them and say, this is the job I'm going for. This in particular is the problem that they're trying to solve, which I did. So please highlight that in the discussion. That makes sense?
Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah.
And the
Thank
other
you.
thing is that don't assume that everybody knows what you do. So you had somebody write, you said that you met with somebody who had a resume that just put UX and assumed a lot of stuff.
Yeah, they just put the title.
Yeah, don't assume that when you meet with a UX decision maker or hiring manager or senior leader, that they're going to assume that you already know what to do and how to do it, right? You still need to be able to articulate it. The professional thing to say, if you are wondering if you're going to bore the person in front of you, is say, Debbie, I know that you understand the UX domain. How detailed do you want me to get on how I went through this?
Yeah, great way to do it. That way you can gauge someone else's needs or the amount of time they have. And because I've said something like that to people, like I've said, oh, there's a lot of story I could tell you around that one. Do you want the small, medium, or large version? And sometimes people will say, well, what can you tell me in 2 minutes? And I say, okay.
There you go. And that's what you're looking for, right? The other thing is, I'm going to also ask you to ask your audience to think about and don't be afraid to ask the people that you are meeting with, what are your requirements in your role? Why are you looking to hire me based on what it is that you personally and professionally are trying to accomplish? Remember, you're there to help somebody look good. And so your story should also include that, not only those I statements, but if you worked for a senior user experience person, perhaps you took them from a director to a vice president, right? Based on the work that you did. They are hiring you because they need to accomplish something. So don't forget about all the people that you've worked with in your career that you have helped get promoted.
Excuse me. I'm sorry. I'm so sleepy today. The people listening to the podcast don't know I keep yawning, but it's not Lee. Lee's one of the most animated, exciting people I know.
Very animated.
It's never you. I gotta do these in the morning, but wow, great. Again, guys, we are live. So if you are with us on LinkedIn, we've got 11 people on LinkedIn right now. We've got one person on YouTube. Hello, lone person on YouTube. Are you lonely? If you guys have any questions or comments, I know Adrian's been hitting us fast and furiously. We'll have to go back on LinkedIn and read it later. But if anybody has any questions or comments about what Lee does, what she can do for you, and where storytelling is important in UX, throw it out there. Otherwise, Lee and I are going to keep yapping.
So yeah, and I as far as I'm concerned, I think that I taught a storytelling formula to over 400 people inside the intelligence community. And that's what I offer. One of the things that I offer through Akatame is a storytelling workshop. And I will tell you, it made my heart sing when people who are responsible for the safety of U.S. citizens and a lot of diplomacy throughout the world were coming up to me after the workshop saying, you hear storytelling all the time. Everybody's out there pushing storytelling, but I wasn't able to articulate or craft the story until they saw the actual formula. So, and it's simple, Debbie, but it's not always easy. So if you are working on your stories, you do need to run them by people before you go to an interview. If you're not doing mock interviews like Debbie and I just did, if you're not doing that, you're doing yourself a disservice because you'll come up with things that you wouldn't have thought of without somebody.
Yeah, I've got something to say about that, but Adrian posted something that I'm going to kind of turn into a question. He said the big thing that he looks for is reliability. Can I rely on you? Now, are there certain things that we can put in a resume or say in an interview that let people know? Because that's one of those things where I feel like everybody self-assesses positively. Everybody believes they can be relied upon. If someone says, can I rely on you? I say, you sure can. But like, what's something that I can say that doesn't sound to stock out of the box that helps you really believe you can rely on me?
It's your
Is
story.
There something?
Again, yes,
okay.
It goes right back to your story.
I walked right into that.
You did, and thank you very much. So I want you guys to write these three things down. Your resume needs to show what you have done, and it also should show what you did, right? What you have done, what you can do, and the outcomes. When you get in front of that hiring manager, you have to tell your story about the challenges that you had to overcome. And that's where you talk about reliability. So for example, if you have a midnight launch, you're right there, right, holding everybody else's hands while we're pressing the button at midnight or 2 o'clock in the morning. And I guarantee you that all of your listeners at some point or another have gone through this, right? So right. There's the can do, there's the will do, and there's the will fit. The fit part is the absolute hardest thing for people to evaluate, to measure. The fit really focuses around attitude, initiative, and reliability. And I learned this decades ago working for another staffing company called Advantage, which I'm not sure they're around anymore. But one of the partners in that company came up with this formula, and it no matter where I go, it still works. So attitude is somebody's ability to do whatever it takes to get the job done. Initiative means, are you an order taker, or are you somebody who asks and thinks and figures things, or do you wait until somebody tells you to do something?
Proactive problem solver.
Yes, and that should all be part of your story, right? So, and then the reliability part is, are you there when you are needed? And there's no clock involved.
Yeah.
Are you there when you are needed, when it's not necessarily in your job description?
And you also don't want to sound super crazy, like I worked 90 hours a week and gave up my wife and whatever. I mean, you don't want to be that person either.
Right. So in your stories, as we start with what has been your most significant accomplishment, as Debbie was going through that story, I was asking nothing but why, how, why, when, who, because I want to get the full picture of exactly what she did and how she did it. From that one question, thank you, Lou Adler. I'll give you credit for that, for teaching me that years ago, Lou. I can glean exactly what kind of an environment Debbie will be best suited for, what kind of a manager she would be best suited for. What kind of, I can tell you all that, so that within an hour, I can go pick up the phone and call anybody that I know who is hiring and saying, this is why you want to talk to Debbie. And that's really all it takes.
So, Lee, you have a new super fan in our LinkedIn room. Kleber is saying, I would love to know more about Lee and what she does. This is the first time I hear from her, and I am like, wow, I need to know more about her. Please share how we can connect and follow up with her content. So, of course, Lee, I'll link everybody to your profile on LinkedIn. Maybe spell your company name again for everybody and tell them where else they can follow you or connect with you, because everyone should.
Thank you. You're biased, Debbie.
I've been connected to you for 10 years
I was
and
just going to say, yeah, you're pretty
but
biased.
it's been 10 good years.
Thank you. Thank you. And ditto for me. So you can find me on LinkedIn, and it's under Lee Andrese. The company name is Akathame, Akathame, Akathame. And there's also a website called akathame.com, and you can see all of the services that we offer. There's one other thing about storytelling that I want you guys to be aware of, is that when you tell your stories, you shouldn't be sweating. When many people get, especially you guys are, first of all, let me put it to you this way. User experience people have big brains, like really big brains. And when you're dealing with people who have really big brains, they have a tendency to do two things. Number one, they make some assumptions that everybody knows what they're talking about, because you're so smart, you figure that everybody else around you is so smart. The other thing that you guys tend to do is focus on what you did wrong. So I worked with one person, and honest to God, this person could not get past the mistake that has been made or the problem that happened, right? But that is a sign of being very, very conscientious, right? You guys are
responsible, accountable.
And that is one thing about you. When you take those terms very seriously, you really want the user to have a great experience. That is what you are just born and bred to do. So when that user doesn't get that great experience, it's like nails on a chalkboard, and you don't let it go. Well, I did all these other great things, but there's this one thing I messed up on. Dude, really?
Yeah.
So when that person talked about that question, whoever asked that question about what do we do if something really got fucked up, learn from it. If you can incorporate that into your stories, please do so. I cannot stress that enough. Because that tells me that you are a risk taker. That's another thing I like to hear in stories, especially if you're a leader. If you decided to take any degree of risk to improve an outcome and it didn't work, that's okay. You tried. What did you do to actually make it work in the long run? Right? So that's how you know that you're getting more senior in your capabilities. And by the way, this is not a problem for people who are at senior levels in organizations. That's how they got to where they are, because they can tell the story. The people who struggle in their careers struggle to tell their story. So it's absolutely imperative that you guys learn this, which is why I have the program for people to do
the adventures that people can go on with you.
Yes.
What about now? We've been talking as if in an interview, in a resume, you've got lots of stuff that you can offer up there. But as you know from the crazy crap I post on LinkedIn, I'm focused very much right now on the overwhelming flood of new juniors we have, thanks to all these boot camps and trade schools that have graduated people now looking for jobs. What can those people do to improve their situation? They all think they have to do things to stand out. They all think they have to do things. They're all struggling to get the same -1 jobs. What can the juniors do when they feel like they don't have a story yet?
They do have a story. That's the problem, is that nobody in the school is telling them that they have a story. Everybody's got a story.
You're killing me. Yeah.
Every human being on the planet has a story. It may not be a story that they might be proud of, or is not going to set the world on fire, but you've got a story. So you can start your story by saying, how did you get into UX? Why did you decide to go down that path? What is that mission? If you don't have a mission, and that mission isn't part of your story. So when I was first asked to take on the government division for Aquan, I'm like, please, really, me? I'm going to be in jail within 48 hours. But the CEO and the president had a different idea. It took me a couple of conferences. When I went to an AIGA .gov design conference, and the designers, and I'm talking about junior designers and senior designers, were working in some government agencies, and they came up to me in tears. And they said, Lee, I can't leave because I'm no longer marketable. Lee, how do I get out? Yes. How do I stop? How do I get new technology? Because I'm working on equipment that's 7 to 10 years old. I mean, in tears. And so I made it my mission. And if you are new to user experience and you chose this practice as a way of income in life, then you are on a mission. What is that mission? It is to make people like me, the end user, the lowest common denominators, life easier. So if that is what you want to do, that's got to be in your story as a newbie. And somehow you need to incorporate that in what you learned while you were in school. If you worked on a certain project, then you focus on why you chose that product or project, what was the problem that you were trying to solve, and how well did you evaluate it to see if it actually would work, right? Take that school project and put it out there in the world. You're a tester. Your user experience, go test it. Do something different. Don't just do it in the classroom. Get out there and test it.
And that's another place where I wish people would talk about their fuck ups a little more. Like I see a lot of portfolios and I see that the idea wasn't that strong. The research didn't totally back it because it was school. They kind of had to do it anyway. The testing also made it look weak. And instead of just being honest and saying, this ended up not being a strong idea. It fell apart here, here, and here, but it was a school project and we kind of had to go through with it. We couldn't shift in the middle. Instead of being honest about it, every portfolio I have seen that has had that happen will say, but everybody loved the idea and I bet it would make a really great app. And that's when I go, I don't want to interview this person because they're not able to look at their own work in a more objective way and be honest and say, you know what, I had to do this project for school and I had to do it with these teammates. But, if I could do this over in a company or myself or whatever, these are the things I would have done. And that would give me more confidence in some of these juniors if they said, here's how this project should have gone. Like I saw one the other day where they were like, well, I did these interviews. And then after they did the interviews, they were like, I guess I should have interviewed people that would have given me better answers. And I was like, hold on, little doggy. So, and then I was like, why didn't you then go and how did you not get the right answers in the first place? Why didn't you go pursue them in the second place? Why are you just Monday morning quarterbacking yourself and then going, and I'll move on? So I think that juniors shouldn't be afraid to tell a portfolio story of a fucky project, that it's okay if your school project was kind of crappy, didn't test well, wasn't a strong idea. Let's be honest about that. I'm more likely to want to interview you and hear your story if I feel like you can be honest about that in the portfolio rather than trying to cover it in glitter and say, well, it was a crappy idea, blown apart by research, pooped on in testing, but everybody liked it.
Yeah, no. Actually, I think that's exactly why we do research and testing, to figure out if something will work or not work, right? So I utilize the methodologies and the practices of UX, or of UR and usability testing, and lo and behold, what I had was crap. So what they really liked about what that student did was actually the user research and testing. And if you are in user experience and you are a researcher or a tester, then that's the value that you bring to the capability and to the organization to quantify or nullify a hypothesis, right? One of the two, because that's a lot of what we work in, right? We think this is going to work. Well, let's go figure it out. So I'm going to tell you another story about somebody who was a graduate of a very well-known college. And this kid at the time changed that department's user experience program, because he went back even as a kid and said, this isn't going to teach me anything. The student went to the instructor and said, this isn't teaching me anything. And thank God you had an open-minded practitioner of an instructor, right? So the instructor was actually a UX practitioner and said, you know what, you're right. This isn't working. So that student was able to go back and change. I mean, that's a great story as a student. What are you doing to make that program better? What are you doing to make that project better? You've got a story. Your first story is why you're getting into user experience. What's your mission? Your second story is how well did you do on that project in your classes? And tell me what you learned. How would you do it differently? Right?
I was asked that in an interview once. Somebody once asked me to show some of my work, and I showed it and talked through it a little bit. And he goes, okay, and if you were designing that today, what would you do differently? And I thought that was one of the best questions I'd ever been asked, which was because I think I'd said at some point, like, this got a little rushed. It didn't turn out as well as I'd hoped, blah, blah, blah. But, it still tested okay. And so, and he was like, and what would you do differently now? And I was like, oh, super question. Ooh,
here's another great question for you. Start asking this of hiring managers and of clients, specifically hiring managers. Would you, if you had the choice to stay in this company, stay in the job that you're currently in, or look at a different position or a different company, what would you do? So you're asking your hiring manager, how many times have you ever taken a job and the hiring manager leaves within a month of you starting?
Ooh.
That's happened. It happens a lot.
Right.
So what you want to do is you're gauging. So, how excited are you about the position that you're in is really what you're asking. And what would you like to be as your customer or as your former hiring manager? Just ask them, what are your aspirations? What is your next step as a career? Because as a provider, I want to help my employer or my boss get to that level. And if I can't help them or I don't want to help them, that's a whole different kind of story.
Yeah, that is an interesting question. I remember thinking about that at Macy's, but not being able to do anything about it. That my boss was one of the best bosses I'd ever had in my life, and they were looking to fill the position above him. And many of us thought he should have been in that job, but we didn't know what to do. We didn't know how to help him, but we all knew he should have had that job. And then they went and hired somebody else into that job, and that was actually the beginning of the downfall of the whole department, because many of us feel that they didn't choose a strong person. I don't know what I could. That's such an interesting question. You make me feel like I wish I could have gone back to my boss and said, we all think you should be the VP of this department. How do we all make this happen? How do we help your career? You're so right that sometimes we're so focused on what can the manager do for us, but I feel like we should have done something for him.
Yeah, I mean, maybe a trip to HR. And it's not even that. It's, do you want to help that person succeed? When you're an employee, we've got to, I beg your audience, please stop thinking of yourselves employees. You are service providers. The person that you are helping, your boss, you're going to help them look good in the organization. That's really what you do on top of everything else and helping the end user and doing all these other things. Your boss is relying on your ability to accomplish something that needs to be accomplished to help him or her get to that next level as well. So you've got to have that click. So
well, I should let you go. We've run the hour. I should let you go. But just a reminder to everybody, please find Lee online in every possible way. I'm going to just spell her name quickly for those listening to the audio version of the podcast who can't see on the video the spelling of her name. Lee is Lee. Her last name is A-N like Nancy, D as in Delta CX, R-E-S as in Sierra, E. So please find her however you want to pronounce her. Of course, I've been Debbie Levitt, your Delta CX friend. You can find me on LinkedIn as Debbie Levitt. You can go to Delta CX and learn more about our world and our book and our offerings. Lee, parting words. No.
Tell your story. Tell your story from a place of humility and excitement and to be of service. That's it.
Yes, please. I've seen a couple of portfolios. I've seen 60 portfolios in the last 5 weeks. And
oh my goodness,
the ones that were not humble, the ones that were arrogant stand out to me so negatively. Yeah. And you really summed it up there. So guys, everyone, I know that the chat room's been very grateful for you today, and I think you have some new fans. And thanks to Adrian for all of his live tweeting, for those of you on LinkedIn, live LinkedIning. Some quick programming notes. We will see you guys next week for our next podcast, which is going to be Thursday, February 6th. That's with William Intin, who's going to talk about presenting to stakeholders and what to do when you get pushback. I'm excited about that one.
Yeah, I bet it's based on storytelling.
I bet he's got some stories for us. I think he said it was based on, I think he's a lead UX guy at the Home Depot.
There you go.
Yeah, so he's going to have some great stories for us. Everybody tune in, subscribe on YouTube to Delta CX, and see you all around LinkedIn. Lee, thank you again.
Thank you so much. Bye, everybody.
Bye.